Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. Ngozi had just folded her wrapper at the waist and lowered herself gently onto the sofa like a woman who had finally reached safe harbor after sailing through a storm of chores. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that made you feel like you'd finally been noticed by peace. She leaned back, one leg stretched on the arm of the couch, and her eyes wandered lazily toward the calendar hanging on the cream wall. The fan rotated above, slicing the heat into manageable slices, while the faint smell of palm oil from the afternoon's okra soup still lingered in the air. Her phone lay face down on the table, forgotten, a soft buzz humming beneath it like a sleeping mosquito. And just when the world had started to taste sweet on her tongue, she heard it, that abrupt rattle of the gate latch. Her body stiffened. It wasn't the gate's usual whine that caught her attention, but the way it clicked with purpose, like a stranger walking into a conversation uninvited. The knock that followed was sharp, 3 deliberate thuds, not too loud, not too timid, just firm enough to freeze her thoughts in place. Her heart did a lazy somersault. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her husband, Emeka, was still at work, and the neighbors rarely visited unannounced. Rising slowly, she moved toward the door, each footstep weighed down by caution. The moment she turned the knob and pulled open the door, it felt as though the house inhaled in surprise. There, standing on the step with 2 travel bags and a plastic basket of smoked fish, was Mama Emeka. The older woman wore a stern face like a badge of honor, her lips tightly pressed and her brows already dancing with silent judgment. Her scarf was tied with the same precision as her words. "So, I have to call before coming now? In?" she asked without giving room for greetings, her eyes sweeping over Ngozi like someone inspecting a borrowed garment. Ngozi blinked, taken aback, trying to lace respect with reason. Mama, welcome home. I was only asking. Maybe you told Emeka you were coming, but the damage had already been done." Mama Emeka adjusted her wrapper, flared her nostrils, and dragged her bags inside without waiting for permission, muttering something about disrespect that blew past Ngozi's ears like dry wind against a closed window. The air in the parlor grew thick, like someone had spilled kerosene over a lit stove and dared it to catch fire. Ngozi didn't say much, and Mama Emeka didn't need many words to sharpen her mood. Her silence alone cut like cold steel. She sank into the center chair like a monarch claiming a long-lost throne, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, and her eyes scanning the room with the suspicion of someone who had heard tales and was now searching for proof. The older woman opened the plastic basket and began unpacking its contents onto the center table, one smoked fish at a time, as if preparing an altar. "Since you married my son, he has become a shadow of himself," she said suddenly, her voice slicing through the room like a cane on bare skin. "He no longer looks fresh. His eyes are sinking. His cheeks are dry. Tell me, are you starving, my child?" Ngozi, who had been standing by the wall like a well-trained soldier, bit her tongue till it trembled. She knew better than to shout, but silence too had its limits. She took a deep breath, as if searching her soul for composure, then replied with calm firmness, "Mama, your son is not a baby. He eats what he wants. I cook every day. If he skips meals, it's not because there's no food." But her words, instead of extinguishing the fire, only added fuel. "And?" Mama Emeka scoffed. "You mean to tell me that a full-grown man now feeds himself like a bachelor? Is that what you learned from your own mother?" Ngozi didn't respond. She walked slowly toward the couch and sat on the edge, her hands folded in her lap like someone holding back a flood. She made no effort to carry the older woman's bags to the guest room, nor did she offer her water. Instead, she let her stew in her own words, because some fires burn faster when fed with attention. The wall clock ticked audibly in the room, marking time like a referee watching a dangerous match spiral out of control. Evening tiptoed into the house, dragging with it long shadows and an uneasy silence. Ngozi remained in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan that spun like her thoughts, slow, weary, and tired of pretending. She didn't call Amika. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like complaint, and she had promised herself not to be that kind of wife, the one who always called her husband midday to report his mother. Instead, she listened. Every now and then, Mama Emika would cough deliberately from the parlor, not because she was sick, but because she wanted to be heard. And when Amika's key turned in the lock around 6:45 p.m., the atmosphere shifted again. He stepped in, loosened his tie, and stopped dead in his tracks. "Mama," he asked, surprised, "you didn't say you were coming." His voice was even, but the crease on his forehead betrayed the confusion swirling beneath. "I came to see for myself," Mama Emika replied, arms still folded like a verdict. "Your voice on the phone always sounds tired. You don't even send good money home again. You don't look like yourself." Emika chuckled awkwardly, already exhausted by the confrontation he hadn't signed up for. "But I just sent money last week," he said. "That small thing?" she snapped back. "Is that one money?" Ngozi, who had stepped out of the bedroom in time to hear the exchange, stood by the corridor wall like a statue, her ears wide open but her lips zipped. She watched her husband scratch the back of his neck as if searching for the right sentence to hold the room together. But in that moment, even language seemed to have given up. Later that night, after a dinner no one truly enjoyed, Emika paced into the bedroom and sat at the edge of the bed like a man who had misplaced his piece. He dialed his father quietly, turning his back to the door. "Papa, is Mama with you?" he asked. The answer on the other end came like ice water down his spine. "She said you invited her," his father replied, puzzled. "I've been calling since morning. She wouldn't pick." Emika rubbed his eyes and let out a heavy sigh. "Papa, I didn't invite her. I'm telling you the truth. This marriage is still new, and this stress, I didn't sign up for it." His father went quiet, then exhaled deeply like a man who had seen this movie before. "Talk to her gently," Papa Emika said. "But don't let her scatter your home." Emika nodded even though his father couldn't see him. The call ended, but the wait remained. When he returned to the parlor, Mama Emika was still awake, seated like a night vigilante. He didn't scold her. He didn't argue. He simply said, "Mama, you can sleep here tonight, but tomorrow we'll take you back home." Ngozi, hearing from the hallway, whispered one word under her breath, "Finally." But just as peace was trying to find its way back in, Mama Emika spat the last venom of the night. "I know she has charmed you, but it won't work." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a burnt offering, and no one dared breathe it in. The sun rose quietly over the fictional town of Yumala, painting the compound in soft amber light, but the tension within Ngozi's household refused to be softened by dawn. Ngozi stood in the narrow kitchen, hands moving from memory, cracking eggs, slicing onions, boiling water, but her mind was far from the breakfast forming on the stove. The clatter of pots masked her thoughts, but not the ache swelling beneath her ribs. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, Mama Emika's last words circled her like hungry flies. "I know she has charmed you." No matter how she tossed and turned, the weight of that accusation clung to her skin like damp harmattan fog. In the parlor, the older woman was already awake, seated in the same stiff posture she'd held through the night, one hand clasped around her purse like she feared someone would snatch it in her sleep. Ngozi glanced in once. Their eyes met briefly, and she offered a courteous nod, the kind given to a neighbor you never quite liked but needed to live beside. Mama Emika said nothing, just narrowed her eyes as if weighing the younger woman's soul. Ngozi sighed. She knew better than to stir an already boiling pot, but even silence had its own voice, and this one was loud enough to make the entire house uneasy. Emika hadn't left the room yet. Perhaps he, too, needed the quiet to wrap his head around the storm his mother had brought in the folds of her wrapper. The tea boiled over slightly and Ngozi quickly removed the pot, blinking away the sting of rising steam, just as she tried blinking away the slow bitterness that started to creep into her chest like morning mildew. By the time Emeka emerged, the clock had marched past 8 a.m., but the house still felt stuck in yesterday. He looked drained, the kind of tiredness that didn't come from sleep deprivation, but from mental tug-of-wars and unsaid words. He entered the kitchen first, gave Ngozi a look that was half apology and half helplessness, then whispered, "Did she say anything to you again?" Ngozi shook her head without meeting his eyes, replying with a faint, "No, not since last night." But Emeka could read between the silences. He always had. They shared the kind of understanding that needed few words to breathe. He took the cup of tea she handed him and moved toward the parlor like a man approaching a ticking clock. "Good morning, Mama," he greeted, voice low and even. Mama Emeka, still seated with her legs crossed like a judge, responded with "Morning," followed by a long sniff. "So," she began, "when are we going to the market?" "I came with fresh fish, but I don't trust her hand. I want to cook soup myself." Emeka sipped his tea, blinked, and sat opposite her. "Mama," he said gently, "you know I'm going to work today." She scoffed loudly, the sound slicing through the quiet like dry cassava cracking beneath a pestle. "So you will leave me here alone with her?" she asked. "Is that what this marriage has turned you into?" Emeka held his tongue between his teeth for a few seconds, trying not to let anger slip through his lips. "Mama," he said again, firmer this time, "Ngozi is my wife. I won't let you make her uncomfortable in her own space. You are my mother, yes, but this place is not for war." The statement hung heavy in the air. Mama Emeka blinked at him as if trying to confirm whether the voice she just heard still belonged to her son or a stranger. Ngozi had retreated back into the kitchen, her ears alert despite her body facing the cabinet. She didn't want to overhear the conversation, but some words were like smoke. They crept into the corners no matter how tightly you shut the door. She heard Emeka defending her, and her heart softened, but only for a moment. Experience had taught her not to bask too long in moments of peace when storms loomed around corners. After Emeka left for work, his face calm, but his shoulders stiff, Ngozi came out and asked, "Mama, will you eat now?" Her voice was measured, polite, but not warm. Mama Emeka looked her over and replied, "Let me manage it." Even if your cooking has no flavor, hunger is not a visitor one should turn away. Ngozi didn't flinch. She simply served the food, placed it gently on the table, and walked back into the kitchen. As the spoon hit the plate, Mama muttered, "Too much salt," then "Not enough pepper," then finally, "Maybe it's the spoon that's bitter." The insults were dressed as complaints, but Ngozi could hear the venom in each one. She leaned on the kitchen sink, hands trembling slightly, not because of fear, but because it was exhausting to be a gracious host to someone who came not for peace, but for power. She wanted to scream, to call Emeka and tell him everything, but what good would it do? He already knew, and knowing didn't mean he could stop it. Some battles were not loud. They just stayed with you like old scars, bleeding on days you thought had healed. That afternoon dragged like a wheelbarrow with a flat tire, wobbling through every hour with resistance. Ngozi avoided the parlor, choosing instead to occupy herself with folding clothes, dusting corners that didn't need dusting, and pretending to organize spices in the kitchen just to have an excuse not to sit near Mama Emeka. Around 2:30 p.m., the older woman dozed off in the chair, her head tilted backward, mouth slightly open, wrapper riding up just above her knees. Ngozi glanced at her once and kept walking. The peace was temporary, like harmattan rain, light and brief, and never enough to plant a crop. When Emeka returned later that day, the house was silent, not because things were resolved, but because exhaustion had gagged every mouth. He kissed Ngozi softly on the cheek, a rare public display in the presence of his mother. She didn't resist it, but she didn't smile either. Mama Emeka watched them from her chair, eyes squinting like someone watching a bad play unfold. "You didn't call me today," she said to her son, deliberately ignoring Ngozi's presence. Emeka replied, "I was busy, Mama. Work was plenty." And then she sighed long and loud, the kind of sigh that demanded explanation. "This is not how I raised you," she said slowly. "You've changed." Emeka turned toward her, smiled politely, and said, "People change when they start building something that belongs to them." Mama hissed, "What do you mean by that? That I should not come again?" The conversation was heading toward fire, and Ngozi didn't want to watch the sparks. She excused herself and went into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her, not out of fear, but to hold on to the last pieces of her sanity. Emeka sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on the floor like the answers to his storm were hidden in the tile patterns. The walls felt closer now, the room smaller, as though the presence of unspoken tension had squeezed out the oxygen. Ngozi stood by the wardrobe, folding and unfolding a towel, more out of restlessness than purpose. She wanted to speak, to ask him if he saw what she had been enduring in silence, but words felt too brittle, too easily misunderstood. Instead, she waited. Emeka sighed, deep and full, the kind of sigh that seemed to stretch from his lungs into his bones. "I don't know what to do," he said at last, voice low, like he feared even the fan might judge him. Ngozi didn't move closer. She didn't nod. She didn't touch his shoulder. She just looked at him, the way a wall watches a man lean on it without ever asking to be leaned on. She said, "I invited her," he added, almost as if that detail had only now occurred to him. Ngozi's brows lifted, not in surprise, but in a slow realization of betrayal layered beneath all this chaos. "Did you?" she asked softly, not accusing, not sarcastic, just a question stripped to its barest form. Emeka turned his head quickly. "No. God forbid. I didn't. That's why I'm even more confused. She lied to Papa. She told him I asked her to come." The towel slipped from Ngozi's hand and fell to the floor like punctuation. "Then you need to call your father," she said, walking to the chair to sit, her eyes not on him now, but somewhere between disbelief and disappointment. "Let him hear your voice, not hers, before this matter grows wings." He picked his phone from the nightstand, hesitation dancing in his fingers. This wasn't the kind of call you made and then went back to slicing yam like nothing happened. He dialed slowly, each button like a question mark. Papa Emeka answered on the third ring, his voice gruff but alert. "Good evening, sir," Emeka began, trying to gather strength behind his calm. "Papa, please, I want to clear something." There was a pause on the other end, then Papa said, "I've been waiting for your call since morning." Emeka exhaled. "Sir, Mama came here yesterday without informing me. She said I invited her, but I swear I didn't." The line stayed quiet for a beat, then Papa's voice came through like thunder muffled by distance. "Are you telling me she came to Lagos on her own and claimed it was your plan?" Emeka nodded before realizing he needed to speak. "Yes, sir. That's exactly what happened. And since she came, things have not been peaceful in my house. Ngozi hasn't even had space to breathe. Mama's been accusing her, saying I look worn out, that my money isn't enough, that my wife is using charm. Papa, it's too much." The silence on the other end turned heavy. Then Papa said something Emeka would remember for a long time. "Your mother has a way of pushing water into fire and calling it soup. You must be careful. That woman means well, but she doesn't know where to draw the line. Protect your home, my son. Marriage is not a village meeting." Emeka's throat tightened, not just from relief, but from the burden of knowing the battle he had to face would be wearing his mother's face. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "I needed to hear that." When the call ended, he didn't return to the bed immediately. He stood there, staring at the closed bedroom door, wondering what would happen when he opened it and had to meet his mother's eyes again. In the parlor, the atmosphere had changed, not because anything had been said, but because Ngozi had stepped out briefly to pick something from the veranda and returned with new resolve dancing in her spine. She sat across from Mama Emika, not like a daughter-in-law waiting to be liked, but like a woman reclaiming her ground. The older woman noticed it. Her face pinched slightly, as though smelling something she couldn't name. "You didn't offer me water since morning," she said. "Not even small malt. Is that how your mother trained you?" Ngozi looked at her steadily, her voice neither raised nor cold. "Mama, you came without notice. You started attacking me the moment you entered this house. You didn't come to visit, you came to prove a point." "But I don't know what battle you are fighting. I am not holding your son hostage. He's not under a spell. He's a man with his own will." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. Mama Emika blinked twice, her lips parted in surprise that someone had finally met her at the gates of her thunder. But before she could gather a comeback, Emika stepped in, quiet but purposeful. "Mama," he said, "I spoke with Papa. He didn't know you came. He thought I invited you." She shifted in her seat, crossed and uncrossed her legs, like someone suddenly unsure of their own plan. "Ah, I didn't think you would mind," she said, tone softer but still defensive. "I'm your mother now. Can't I visit my son?" Emika didn't respond immediately. He sat beside Ngozi, reached for her hand, and held it. "You're my mother, yes, but this is my home now. If you come and bring fire, you'll burn both of us. And I cannot allow that. I love you, Mama, but I love my wife too. Don't make me choose." Mama Emika's mouth moved, but no sound followed. She just stared at their joined hands, as though trying to interpret a language she never learned. The night crawled in slowly, heavy with a silence that wasn't peace but retreat. Ngozi lay beside Emika, wide awake, her eyes open in the darkness as the ceiling fan spun stories above her head. "I wonder what tomorrow will be like," she whispered. Emika turned to face her, his hand finding hers in the dark. "She'll leave," he said. "I'll take her back myself." "This is not the life I want for us. I didn't marry you to put you on trial." Ngozi didn't reply immediately. She inhaled, slow and deep, letting the air fill the cracks in her chest. "It's not just about me, Emika. Your mother came into this house and reduced me to a stranger. I gave her my respect, and she threw it at my feet like I begged for it." Emika moved closer. "I know. And I hate that you had to go through this. But please, let's finish it tomorrow. One more night. Let's just survive this one last night." She nodded faintly, tears burning behind her eyelids but refusing to fall. Down the hallway, Mama Emika turned on her side on the couch, eyes open, arms wrapped around herself like someone nursing invisible wounds. Perhaps she had expected a different reaction. Perhaps she thought her son would bend like a raffia mat under pressure. But this was a different season, and seasons have a way of humbling even the strongest rainmakers. The morning broke with the quiet sigh of a tired sky. Sunlight slipped gently through the curtains like it had been instructed not to disturb anyone. In the room, Ngozi was already awake, seated on the edge of the bed, slowly tying her scarf with deliberate hands. She looked calm, but beneath her skin, thoughts were racing like unbridled horses. The events of the past 2 days had left a sour taste in her soul, the kind that even prayer hadn't fully washed away. Emika still lay beside her, chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm, but even in his sleep, his forehead wore a crease, like a man whose dreams were no longer a refuge. Ngozi stood and tiptoed out, careful not to wake him. The house was quiet, save for the distant chirp of birds and the occasional shuffle of rats behind the kitchen cupboard. When she stepped into the parlor, she found Mama Emika already awake, seated exactly where she had fallen asleep, back stiff and wrapper tied firmly across her chest like armor. Their eyes met, and there was no exchange of greetings, just a long glance that said more than words ever could. Ngozi turned and went straight into the kitchen. She boiled water for tea, stirred oats into a pot, and sliced bananas in silence. Her movements were methodical, not rushed, not delayed, like a woman who was no longer trying to impress or defend herself, only trying to survive one more morning. She plated the food neatly, placed a cup of warm tea beside it, and carried the tray into the parlor. "Mama, your breakfast," she said softly, placing the tray on the stool. The older woman looked at the food, then at Ngozi, then looked away. "You made it too early. Who eats this early? Or is it that you want to poison me before my son wakes up?" The insult didn't land the way it was meant to. Ngozi didn't flinch. She simply turned around and walked back into the kitchen, washing her hands slowly under the tap, as if washing off every venomous word that had touched her spirit. Emeka eventually woke up and joined them in the parlor, dressed in a simple tee and faded jeans, his face still swollen with sleep. He greeted his mother, who grunted in response, then turned to Ngozi and whispered, "She hasn't said anything, has she?" Ngozi shook her head and said nothing. He sat beside his mother and asked, "Mama, are you ready to go today?" Her eyes darted quickly to his, disbelief and indignation flashing in them like lightning before rain. "So you people are truly sending me away?" she asked, her voice small but sharp. "After raising you with my own hands, feeding you with my own mouth, nursing you with these same breasts you now ignore, this is how you repay me?" Emeka rubbed his hands together and exhaled slowly. "Mama, no one is sending you away. But this house is not a battlefield. I didn't get married to live in conflict. I brought Ngozi into my life to build something peaceful. You came without telling me, and from the moment you arrived, nothing has been the same." His mother blinked furiously, her mouth trembling with unreleased words. "Peace?" she repeated, her voice cracking. "Is it peace to watch your son vanish under a woman's spell? Is it peace when your own mother cannot eat in your house without being served like a visitor?" Emeka leaned forward, his tone growing firmer, not loud but clear. "Mama, this is my home. Ngozi is my wife, not a stranger. You've treated her with contempt since you walked in. I let it go yesterday. I let it go the day before. But it cannot continue. You're my mother, but you're also a guest here, and guests don't turn their host into dust under their feet." Mama Emeka's hands trembled slightly, the veins rising like rivers in dry season. She looked away, lips pressed tightly, and said nothing more. Emeka stood, picked her handbag, and placed it beside her travel bag. "Let's leave by noon. I already called someone to drive us." The hours that followed passed in stiff silence, like a room holding its breath. Ngozi remained in the kitchen, wiping surfaces that didn't need wiping and checking pots that had nothing cooking inside. It wasn't the work she needed. It was the distraction, something to keep her from falling apart in front of a woman who had walked into her life like a thief of peace. Mama Emeka remained in the parlor, occasionally humming old songs that sounded more like dirges than melodies. She didn't eat the breakfast Ngozi served. Instead, she wrapped it up and dropped it into her handbag without a word. Ngozi watched her do it through the mirror in the hallway, but she didn't react. By midday, Emeka was ready. He'd ironed a shirt and changed into new trousers, his shoulders squared, his jaw tight with unspoken resolve. When he emerged with the car key in his hand, Mama Emeka stood slowly and adjusted her wrapper. She looked at Ngozi one last time, her gaze long and piercing. "You think you've won," she said under her breath. "But charm does not last forever. One day he will see you for what you are." Ngozi met her gaze with calm eyes, not hardened but unshaken. "If love is charm, then I won't apologize," she replied. "If peace looks like manipulation to you, then maybe it's your own mind playing tricks." The words weren't raised, but they struck like thunder whispered into a cave. Mama Emeka hissed loudly and stormed out of the door, Emeka following behind her, travel bags in hand. Ngozi stood by the window and watched them go. The compound felt still, as if the trees and the wind had also been watching, also been waiting for this exit, and when the car finally rolled out of the gate, she exhaled, not in triumph, but in release. It wasn't until the evening breeze began sneaking through the open windows that Ngozi realized just how heavy the air had been for days. The walls felt wider now, the silence softer, like the house itself was thankful. She lit a scented candle in the corner of the parlor and wiped down the center table. The tray of untouched breakfast remained, and she removed it without anger. She poured the tea into the sink and dumped the oats into the bin, her hand steady, her heart still. Emeka returned later that evening, dusty from the trip, but calm. He walked in, placed his keys gently on the shelf, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "She's home safely," he whispered into her neck. Ngozi nodded but didn't turn. "I'm sorry," he added, "for everything." She leaned into his chest, her body softening in his hold. "You did what you had to do," she said. "It wasn't easy. I saw it on your face. But thank you for choosing peace." Emeka kissed her forehead and led her to the couch, where they sat without saying much, just breathing together, like two people nursing a house back to health. Somewhere in the corner, the candle flickered, and in that glow was the fragile beginning of something whole again. The day after Mama Emeka's departure began with an eerie calm, the kind of quiet that follows a storm too loud to ignore, but too recent to forget. Ngozi stood by the kitchen sink, washing the last plate from their early breakfast, the tap water streaming over her fingers like a soft apology. Her movements were gentle, almost reverent, like she was afraid of waking the dust that still lingered in corners the argument had reached. The house no longer groaned under the weight of resentment, but it didn't quite breathe freely yet either. It was a fragile piece, like walking across a floor recently mopped, careful not to slip on what had only just begun to dry. Emeka moved around the house that morning with fewer words than usual, not cold, not distant, just unusually thoughtful. Every now and then he would glance at her from behind his newspaper or over his phone, as though searching her face for something unspoken. Ngozi noticed, but said nothing. She was learning the beauty of silence that didn't demand answers. By mid-morning, he finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "I don't think I ever thanked you properly for how you handled all that." Ngozi, seated on the edge of the couch folding laundry, paused and looked up. "You don't have to," she said. "Marriage is not always about who says thank you. Sometimes it's about who survives what." Emeka smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held guilt and gratitude in equal measure. "Still," he said, "you didn't fight her. You didn't insult her. You made me see everything clearly, and you did it without throwing a single stone." She shrugged gently. "If you throw stones at every barking dog, you'll never reach your destination. Sometimes you just keep walking." Emeka walked to her side and sat beside her on the couch, his hands resting on his thighs like a man preparing for confession. "Can I be honest with you?" he asked, voice barely louder than a whisper. Ngozi nodded, not turning to face him, just waiting. "When my mother came here, I panicked. Not just because of the drama, but because somewhere deep down, I feared she might be right. That I had changed. That maybe marriage had made me forget my roots, my obligations." Ngozi turned slowly, her eyes searching his face. "And do you believe that now?" she asked. He looked down at his hands. "No," he said quietly. "I don't. I know I haven't stopped being her son. But I'm also a husband now. And if I keep trying to please the past, I'll keep punishing the present." Ngozi reached for his hand, her touch light but grounding. "Your mother doesn't hate me, Emeka. She fears me. She fears that someone else now has a voice in your life that's not hers." He nodded, eyes dampening. "I didn't prepare for how hard it would be to be in the middle." "That's because you're not meant to stand in the middle," she replied. "You're meant to build a new corner, your own corner. One where your wife can breathe and your mother can visit, not reside. The clock ticked slowly in the background, and outside, children's voices echoed faintly in the street. The world was moving again, but inside that room, time had paused just long enough for two hearts to speak without shouting. Later that day, Emeka's phone rang. It was his father. Ngozi didn't move from her spot in the kitchen as he answered, but her ears sharpened naturally, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. She could only hear Emeka's side of the conversation. "Yes, sir, she's back safely. No, not really talking. I think she feels ashamed, but she won't say it. Yes, Papa, I'll keep praying too. Thank you, sir." When he hung up, Emeka joined her at the dining table where she was now slicing vegetables for soup. "Papa said Mama hasn't been speaking much since she returned," he said, watching her fingers glide over the cutting board. "He said she's been quiet, like someone who's starting to count their own footsteps." Ngozi kept cutting, but her brows lifted slightly. "She'll be fine," she said. "Mothers are like Irako trees. They don't fall easily, but when they do, the whole village feels it." Emeka chuckled softly, brushing her shoulder as he passed behind her. "You always know what to say." "Not always," she replied. "But I know when not to say anything. That's also wisdom." The soup simmered slowly on the stove as the air filled with the aroma of blended peppers and smoked fish. It wasn't just a meal, it was a declaration that the home was healing. Each chopped leaf, every stirred pot, felt like a stitch in the torn cloth of their marriage. They didn't need to talk much after that. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was familiar, like an old friend who visits often and needs no introduction. As the evening settled in, painting the compound in gold and soft blues, Emeka and Ngozi sat outside on the veranda, sipping chilled zobo from tall glasses. The sun dipped lower behind the neighbors' rooftops, casting long shadows that danced lazily across the cement floor. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of the mango tree beside their fence, and somewhere down the street, a woman's radio played an old high-life tune that made the moment feel like a scene from memory. Emeka leaned back in his chair, his fingers gently brushing Ngozi's. "You know," he said, "when you married me, I thought I was doing you a favor. But these last few days have shown me I was wrong." Ngozi turned to him, half smiling. "You weren't wrong. You were just young in the head and old in the wallet." He laughed, full, deep, the kind of laugh that scattered the last ashes of stress in the air. "I want us to promise something," he said. "No matter who comes, no matter what they bring, we'll talk. Not argue. Just talk." Ngozi raised her glass. "To peace," she said. "To boundaries," Emeka added. "To knowing when to lock the door," she teased. They clinked glasses, and the laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was light, sincere, and full of breath. The home didn't just feel healed, it felt reborn. No longer crowded by expectation, no longer haunted by disapproval. Just two people, sitting on their porch, learning how to be each other's sanctuary after surviving a storm they didn't invite, but had faced together. The following weekend arrived not with thunder or fanfare, but with the calm certainty of a quiet river gliding past sleeping trees. The days after Mama Emeka's departure had been spent in small, deliberate acts of recovery, shared chores, longer conversations, more gentle teasing in the kitchen. Emeka and Ngozi moved around each other not as two people avoiding wounds, but as partners tending carefully to healing skin. Yet beneath the quiet harmony, the echo of those days lingered like a fading bruise, visible only when pressed. On Saturday morning, Ngozi opened the wardrobe and pulled out a wrapper that had been folded untouched since the wedding, bright, bold, and symbolic. She wrapped it tightly around her waist and tied it with a practiced hand, then adjusted her blouse and looked into the mirror. She wasn't checking for beauty. She was checking for resolve. That afternoon, they were going to visit Emeka's parents together. It had been Emeka's idea. Not to apologize, he'd said firmly, but to show presence. Silence too long becomes absence. And absence leaves room for rumors. Ngozi had agreed, not because her heart was fully ready, but because she had learned that readiness was often a myth. and that strength was something you wore like a scarf on a windy day, gripped tightly even when it threatened to fly off. As they left the house, Emeka held her hand more tightly than usual, his thumb drawing small, invisible circles on the back of hers as they drove down the familiar road that led to the family house. Papa Emeka was seated in the corridor when they arrived, dressed in a faded singlet and wrapper, his newspaper neatly folded beside him, and a cup of warm pap in his hand. He stood with effort when he saw them approaching, a smile blooming like reluctant sun across his lips. "Ngozi," he said, voice steady, "come and sit. We've been expecting you." Ngozi bent slightly in greeting, her voice soft but firm. "Good afternoon, Papa. It's good to see you." Inside the house, the air felt heavier. Mama Emeka was seated in the sitting room, her eyes fixed on the small television in the corner that displayed a static local program, the volume low enough not to interrupt thought, but loud enough to excuse silence. She didn't turn when they entered. She didn't greet. Her arms were folded across her chest as if shielding her heart from admitting fault. Emeka cleared his throat and greeted her gently. "Good afternoon, Mama." Ngozi followed with her greeting, adding the respectful two-handed bend, her voice a little quieter than her husband's. Still, silence. It hung like wet linen on a stubborn line, refusing to dry. Emeka pulled a wooden stool and sat beside his mother. "We came because family is not a building you abandon just because a wall cracks," he said. "We came because silence can be more dangerous than anger." The words were not rehearsed, not polished. They came out raw, like yam peeled in the dark. Mama Emeka's shoulders shifted slightly. Her lips pursed. Then finally, her eyes met Ngozi's for the first time since they walked in. "You didn't have to come," she said at last, her voice raspy from holding in too much. "But you came. That means something. Maybe I judged you too early. It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings wore strange clothes." The conversation that followed was not magical. There was no hug, no dramatic reconciliation, no weeping and falling into arms. But there was a subtle thawing, a lessened stiffness in posture, a softer inflection in voice, a willingness to meet eyes instead of avoiding them. Papa Emeka joined in, telling old stories that made Emeka laugh and Ngozi smile cautiously. A pot of stew was placed on the fire outside, and Ngozi volunteered to slice vegetables while Emeka helped fetch water from the back tank. It was the first time she'd moved freely around the family compound, without feeling like she was trespassing. At one point, Mama Emeka joined her on the bench where she sat cutting usiza leaves. She didn't say anything, just sat beside her, watching her fingers work. After a long pause, she muttered, "You're careful with your hands. Not every woman slices like that." "It means you don't rush life." Ngozi looked up, unsure whether to smile or respond. "Thank you, Mama," she finally said. That was it. No more words. But it was enough to shift something in the air. By the time they left that evening, the handshake between Mama Emeka and Ngozi wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. Emeka noticed it, gave his father a knowing nod, and said, "We'll come again." His mother didn't argue. She simply said, "Drive safe." And as they pulled out of the compound, Ngozi exhaled slowly, leaning back into the car seat like a woman who had just walked through a room full of glass and emerged without bleeding. That night, back in their own home, the lights were soft and the windows slightly ajar, allowing the night breeze to kiss the curtains. Ngozi stood in front of the mirror, removing her wrapper and blouse, folding them neatly and placing them in the drawer. Emeka walked in with a glass of water, handed it to her, and said, "You were strong today." She took the glass, sipped slowly, and replied, "I didn't feel strong. I felt like running at least 5 times. He smiled, brushing a loose braid from her cheek. "That's the thing about courage. It shows up in scared people more than in brave ones." She reached for his hand and pulled him toward the bed. They sat down together, legs stretched out, backs against the headboard. "Do you think she'll ever fully accept me?" she asked after a long pause. Emeka didn't rush the answer. He stared ahead for a moment, then said, I don't know. But I know she's starting to see you. Not just as her son's wife, but as a woman. A person. And that's the first step. Ngozi nodded slowly. The fan above them turned lazily, and outside, crickets sang their nightly songs. Then we wait, she said. And while we wait, we live. Emeka turned to her, eyes soft. And while we live, we protect our peace. Together. They lay down, their fingers intertwined on the bedsheet, and for the first time in days, sleep didn't feel like escape. It felt like rest, the kind that comes after a storm not only passes, but teaches you how to build stronger roofs. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are not strangers, but those who share our names, our blood, or the roof over our heads. This story reminds us that marriage is not just about love. It's about building boundaries, setting the right tone in your home, and choosing peace even when it offends those who think they're entitled to your silence. Ngozi's strength wasn't in how loud she responded, it was in how firm she stood. Not every storm needs a thunderous reaction. Some victories are quiet, but complete. And to the Amikas out there, those caught between the voice of their past and the peace of their present, know this: if you don't protect your marriage, your silence will become permission. And what you allow will eventually define your home. Family matters, yes, but your marriage is your responsibility, not a community project. Learn to correct with love, but do not confuse obedience with wisdom. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say, this stops here. Dear Lord, we come before you today with hearts that seek peace, not perfection. For every home facing tension from in-laws, friends, or unspoken expectations, we ask for healing that touches what words cannot fix. Father, give every wife listening the grace to stay grounded, even when storms blow from the people she tries to honor. Give her the wisdom to speak only when needed, and the strength to stand firm without becoming bitter. May her silence never be weakness, but a weapon you use to fight battles on her behalf. Lord, we pray for every husband caught in the middle of loyalty and peace. Give him boldness to build his own home, not with bricks of fear, but with the truth spoken in love. May he never trade his wife's sanity to please old voices, but learn to cleave to the one you gave him as help. To every mother-in-law listening or represented here, we ask for a softened heart. Teach them that love doesn't lose power when it shares space. May they release control and embrace support, knowing that every season demands a new kind of love. Heal the unseen wounds, Lord. Restore broken conversations. Let forgiveness settle like dew upon dry ground. And over every home that has been shaken by intrusion, we declare, let peace return. Let respect rise. Let love stay. In the name of Jesus, we declare that no charm, no accusation, no manipulation will scatter what you have joined. And we say with full hearts, Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.